Hey everyone, and welcome to One Awesome Autistic. Today we are discussing executive dysfunction, what that actually means, what the signs are, and how it can affect you. So let's start with just going through what executive functioning is. So according to WebMD, executive functioning is controlled by the frontal lobe part of the brain, which is pretty much here. And executive functioning is the skills that are required to get things done. Executive function helps you manage time, plan tasks, pay attention, switch focus, organise, remember details, avoid doing or saying the wrong thing, multitasking, and also being able to do things based on your experience. So obviously, because that's the functioning part, executive dysfunctioning means you're unable to do those things or find it extremely difficult to do those things. And when this executive functioning doesn't work properly, it can affect your behaviour, which in turn can have a negative effect on your work life, your school life, and your relationships. A fair few of these signs do overlap with the symptoms of being autistic. So it's not far a leap to see why many people who are autistic also struggle with executive dysfunctioning. You may also hear executive dysfunction being called executive function disorder, but it's not technically an actual diagnosable disorder in its own right, but it is classed as a weakness of the brain's self-management system. I personally don't like the word weakness, but I used it because it's the wording that is used online. Just like with being autistic and having ADHD, I see it as a brain function difference. Online it only mentions that people with ADHD, learning difficulties and depression can be born with executive dysfunction. I would also group being autistic as a separate thing in with those. Quite often being autistic is classed under learning difficulties, but yet not all autistic people have learning difficulties. So just wanted to kind of put that disclaimer out there that this does also refer to autistic people. But as long as being born with it, if you have Alzheimer's, if you end up with a brain injury, or if you have a stroke, you can also develop executive dysfunction. As usual, most of the information online is catered towards parents of children that may have executive dysfunction and how to spot the signs in children. So it may be harder to notice the signs within yourself, and it may be harder for the people around you to notice the signs if they're not looking for it in you because you're an adult. But it doesn't mean that you suffer with executive dysfunction any less. There are a lot of people that other disorders such as autism and ADHD is missed in childhood, so I think it's fair to say that executive dysfunction can also be missed in childhood, especially if you don't have the knowledge about what it is and the signs to look out for. And for some people, and I've had this as well, it may be difficult to actually explain executive dysfunction, how it affects you and how it makes you feel, and for you to recognise why it is so hard to get tasks done or be organised when it may seem to you like such an easy thing to be able to do. And because it is something that, unlike a broken leg, it cannot be seen, it is also quite difficult for the people around you to understand why you feel the way you do, what your abilities are, and the things that you find very difficult or unable to do. And often people with executive dysfunction can just be labelled as lazy by those around them, but there is a huge difference between being lazy and suffering with executive dysfunction. Being lazy is having the ability to do a task but simply choosing not to, putting it off for another time, or refusing to do that task. Whereas having executive dysfunction is wanting to do the task but not having the ability to do so. And that's probably the easiest way I can explain the difference between the two. For me, the only way I have found to describe what it feels like to have executive dysfunction is an invisible wall. It is like there is an invisible wall. I can't see it, nobody else can see it, but it is there in my brain, and it is right in between and cutting off between my brain saying you need to do this task and my actual physical body's ability to do that task, or my brain's want to be organised but my inability to be organised, and instead I am quite unorganised as a person. My executive dysfunction issues were not picked upon as a child, the same with me being autistic and the same with me having ADHD, because I was never in situations where it would be apparent, and also there wasn't as much knowledge about it when I was younger. I'd never heard of it before. I only found out about executive dysfunction once I was diagnosed this year as autistic. The most apparent thing about me in childhood as having executive dysfunction was probably how easily I was distracted, and then how hard I was able to go back to the task that I was doing before being distracted. Instead, I was just seen as and labelled as quite a chatty child that just never shut up. And school is also structured for you. I never really had to think for myself as a child, so a lot of the signs of executive dysfunction was just not seen. Now that I'm in adulthood and I have to rely on myself, I am the only person that is able to get myself organised. I'm the only one that can do the various tasks in my life, and I have to rely on myself for my own structure. And now that I have all that, it is a lot more apparent that I suffer with executive dysfunction. And because currently executive dysfunction is obviously not classed as a disorder in its own right, means there's no official diagnosis for it. But that doesn't mean that there isn't help out there. If your executive dysfunction is caused because you have ADHD, medication or therapies to do with ADHD may lessen the symptoms of executive dysfunction and how it disrupts your life. In the details below, I'll also put the link to the WebMD page where I found a lot of information about executive dysfunction, because there still doesn't seem to be a lot of information out there. On their page, they do have a small section with little hints and tips to help overcome executive dysfunction and some ways in which you can make your life a little bit easier. Talking to a therapist about having executive dysfunction and how it has a negative effect on your life may also help. They may have ways in which they can recognise things you can do to make your life easier and take control of your executive dysfunction. If you suffer with it quite severely, then having more structure but also a support system in your life may be very helpful. If you don't have a lot of people around you that can help, such as family or friends, or you don't want to rely on them too heavily, you can contact the council and you can ask for a needs assessment to be done. And while they may not be able to help you directly, they may be able to give you the places that can. I hope information on executive dysfunction has been helpful to somebody watching, and if you have it or you know somebody that does, please let me know in the comments below how it affects you or them. I'm always interested to see other people's experiences with these things. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like, hit sub. That would be amazing and I would be eternally grateful. But from me, that's all this week, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.